This video is probably going to be the most hated in the series. Now, if you're aware, I've already received criticism for the assessments I made of the taboo relationships in and Eruko-san. Go watch my video where I read comments to see all the details. Those series are relatively niche within the anime and manga community, so I thought it would be a great idea to cover something more mainstream. A lot of people love the thing that I'm going to talk about today. Nanatsu no Taizai, or The Seven Deadly Sins, is a series I hold very close to me. It's one of the first anime, other than the Dragon Ball franchise or Noragami, that I've had genuine investment into, and it's what got a very close friend of mine into anime in the first place. However, as much as I love the series for what it did for me, I can't exactly say that it's all that great. Don't get me wrong, it has some of the best character-driven storytelling a modern shonen has to offer. Go watch the Sunday Pie video to get a good idea on that. There are just, certain decisions that were made throughout and near the end of the series run that didn't exactly vibe with me, if you get what I'm saying. For instance, I wasn't a fan of the fact that they drastically toned down the violence as well as butchered the animation when Season 3 dropped. The moment Escanor vs Meliodas dropped was probably one of the most disappointing moments I've ever had being an anime fan. That and looking at Seiji69's posts on Twitter. Also the period in my life where I thought fan service on schoolgirls was okay. On the topic of realizing things, there's a lot of stuff that Nanatsu no Taizai has that a lot of us anime fans have to come to a similar realization of. The romances. Please call me tonight. Please call me tonight. At a first glance, the romances Nanatsu no Taizai presents are some of the most tragic tales of lovers nearly becoming star-crossed. Bun is, without question, my favorite character ever written, mostly due to how his selflessness not only allowed him to bring back the person he loved, but it also allowed him to find healing when his life was constantly filled with turbulence. However, this is something cursed. As much as I love Bun, there is a certain thing I don't exactly gel with when it comes to his romance. Before I do get into that, I just want to go over the most important relationship in the series just so you guys get a general idea of what's wrong with them. Meliodas and Elizabeth. In short, get it because Meliodas is a leprechaun? Meli is a demon cursed with immortality, and Ellie is a goddess cursed to eternally reincarnate since they defied heaven and hell with their love, and acted on what they truly felt was righteous. Why do I write so... flippin'? Meliodas suffered for thousands of years watching the love of his life die over and over and over again, but finally things changed when the incarnation Elizabeth came into the picture. I mean, right now things don't sound so bad. Right, they don't, but this specific incarnation makes things weird. I mean, unless there were other incarnations very similar to her. Every time Ellie reincarnates, she loses her memories of her previous lives. The only time she remembers anything is just before she dies. So knowing that precious piece of information, we can now come to many tragic conclusions. Elizabeth is 16 years old at the start of the series. Now buckle up, kids, this is where the mental age argument gets debunked. If Elizabeth does not have any memories of her past lives, then she is both biologically and mentally 16 years old, meaning all those times when Meliodas cops a feel, he's STD-ing a child, making those perv jokes significantly worse. What if Ellie does get her memories back? Then she will be able to have the capacity to consent properly. Yes, but, she's still biologically 16. Don't know about you, but that doesn't sound all too cash money. The general idea for all these relationships is that someone is always the child or childlike. As good as the romances are, in terms of how they were written of course, there is always the sense of moral ambiguity to them. Say for instance, Bon and Elaine's relationship. For the first time in what was probably years, Bon was the happiest he ever could have been when he was around Elaine, and with her brother just up and leaving, she didn't have anyone to talk to. They found solace in each other with that, but it was all riven from them. Slain by a demon, Elaine passes on in the immortal Foxen of Greed's arms. Just imagine, he went there to steal immortality for himself, and when Elaine and him had suffered mortal injuries, he had completely forgotten about it by that point. In fact, he instructed her to take the immortality for herself, but she just ended up giving it to him instead. Ironically, in the end he got what he wanted. However, it just had to hurt so damn much. It's a beautiful romance that reaches an outstanding conclusion during the manga's final moments, but I just can't help but think that without context, Elaine will always look like a child. I do acknowledge that there could be an argument for her just being a petite adult like I am, but everywhere I go she's classified as looking like a popsicle despite her probably having the capacity to consent, being that she's at least hundreds of years old. This one is very ambiguous, and I'd rather see other people's perspectives on it before I come to my own conclusions. However, I think the other relationships in this series speak for themselves. They're just straight up wrong. King and Diane. At a first glance, there seems to be nothing wrong. I do think that it's very believable that the King and Diane we saw throughout most of the series could pass off as being in the same age category on a physical standpoint, as well as them both being hundreds of years old and having similar capacities to consent. All is good. You just have to account for their backstory though. King is older than Diane despite them being hundreds of years old. They met when she was but a wee giant in isolation, and with his memories gone, he decided to become her friend. In fact, you could almost say that King raised her since they spent many decades together. Yeah, so giants and fairies age much differently than humans do, as you know. So Diane, within those decades, barely aged mentally or biologically. So technically she was still a child when King fell in love with her. Just imagine. You adopt a kid and then develop romantic feelings for them. This relationship was very mind-boggling to say the least. You'd think that maybe the author received a bit of backlash for writing relationships like this and passing them off as okay. Well, clearly they didn't, because we're still getting taboo relationships to this day. Last and certainly not least, we have Jericho and Lancelot. Jericho was honestly one of the most iconic characters in the series. Her chemistry with Ban was a freaking riot. She has white hair, plus she's 18 years old, making her legal. She is one of the few women in the manga who we can say are waifu material. She fell in love with a 10-year-old.
Like I said, Jack, it's a crew, and I love minors!
Her whole character was assassinated in just one chapter. Christ almighty. So in the sequel series to Nanatsu no Taizai, we follow Percival, his group of friends, and the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. You have the likes of Tristan, Meliodas and Elizabeth's son, Gawain, Escanor's successor, and you have good old Lancelot, who is Ban and Elaine's kid. If you didn't know, Jericho had a bit of a crush on Ban, but ultimately accepted that he was a nonce and moved on, to then end up falling in love with Lancelot when he was 10 years old because she saw him as a man. She couldn't get the man she wanted, so she went for his kid instead. That is the most copium thing I have ever had the privilege of reading. I am going to explain everything in context. Jericho betrays the Holy Knights because she was promised by Arthur that she could be in a world where she could bang Lancelot every day. What the actual frick? Wanna know how I initially thought the reason for her betrayal was gonna go? Well, it was mentioned multiple times that she saw Lancelot as a brother, and isn't it also established that she had a brother who tragically passed on in battle? In fact, we're even reminded of this more because she's using the abilities he passed on to her when he died. Maybe she betrayed the kingdom because she was promised by Arthur that Lancelot could be spared, and she was deeply terrified of losing someone she saw as a brother yet again. Maybe she could also be reunited with her actual brother in Arthur's world to add the extra cherry on top. There's a lot to do in terms of how that affects Lancelot's psyche. I mean, it could have been great motivation for him to maybe show his older sister figure that he's strong and that he definitely has her to thank for that, since they had spent so much time alone in peril for 3 years. Instead, it had to get spun into a Nancy romance subplot because that's just how it is with this manga. Also, remember when that 10-year-old kissed Lancelot and hinted at the fact that there could be more romance between them? Yeah, this series just is not going to stop. I have absolutely nothing to say. Nanatsu no Taizai is a manga that has great characters, but a lot of wacky choices are made that make everything weird. Like how? How do you ruin Jericho? That shouldn't have been possible, but it was. Not only did she go lower than R. Kelly, she went lower than Mayu. What gets me the most about this is that I was very impressionable at one point to think that this stuff was okay. I'm so freaking glad I grew up, holy crap. The whole point of this series is to conscientize, my teacher used that word once, so I liked it ever since, many people about the taboos that we as anime fans have turned a blind eye to because we're horny. I'll say this, I'm not going to point any fingers at anyone because I was also a part of the problem. I was young and impressionable. Every anime fan has had that phase where their waifu is a schoolgirl, and at some point I realized I had to grow out of that. Even after I posted that tweet about me not considering Nagatoro a waifu anymore when I turned 18, I still had those lingering thoughts thinking thinking that I never really should have grown into the high school waifu phase. All I'll say now is that Nagatoro is nothing more than a childhood crush, left in the past. However, with fan service on characters who are minors having no signs of stopping anytime soon, I'm sure that stuff like nonce relationships in series like Nande Kokoni Sensei ga Eruko-san and mainstream anime will not cease. Makima's the only exception though, since her entire character is based on power dynamics, so it would make sense for her to control people the way she does Denji. What am I meant to do with my life? You know what? I'll choose a new outro song for the foreseeable future. Actually, you know what? It might be a benefit if I watch Volume 3 ahead of time. Would probably better inform the Volume 2 video while I'm still writing it. No, that's strange. I don't really remember this episode of Volume 3. Sisterly love? What could that mean?
Aw, come on, Rubes! It's not wrong to love someone you hold close. It's called sisterly love for a reason.
Oh, that's nice. We get a nice sisterly moment. We've never got any of those in the first 2 volumes.
Yang? I don't think it's called that for that reason.
Shh. Now, lay down and let your big sister give you